Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Avoiding the Negotiating Mistakes That Entrepreneurs Make. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Bhaskar Pant, Executive Director of MIT Professional Education.
Thank you. Welcome everyone, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you for joining us for this webinar from MIT Professional Education, featuring MIT Professor Larry Susskind, a world-renowned authority on negotiation. Professor Susskind will speak to you about mistakes entrepreneurs often make in negotiations with various external stakeholders, such as financiers and venture capitalists, and how you can avoid making those mistakes. Professor Susskind's webinar will serve as a preview for a full-blown online course titled Entrepreneurial Negotiations the MIT Way that MIT Professional Education will offer this April. Professor Susskind has been teaching negotiation at MIT for more than 3 decades, putting into practice the MIT motto, mens et manus, mind and hand, or theory and practice. He's known for his innovative use of serious games or role-play simulations in all of his teaching. Professor Susskind helped found the foremost research center in the world for the study of negotiation, the Inter-University Harvard MIT Tufts Program on Negotiation, while also founding and leading the Consensus Building Institute, a company that provides negotiation and dispute resolution advice to government agencies, not-for-profits, companies, and communities around the world. At MIT, Professor Susskind also heads the Environment Policy and Planning Research Group, hence his involvement with global players in the environment arena. I believe you're about to learn quite a few valuable tips from this webinar titled Avoiding the Negotiating Mistakes Entrepreneurs Make. It is now my pleasure to hand you over to Professor Larry Susskind. Larry?
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Special shout out to the viewing parties for this webinar at Oxford Launchpad, UAB Innovation Depot, Monterey Tech in Mexico, and 6 other accelerators and innovation centers in Mexico. There are a lot of case studies of new ventures that have crashed and burned. I've talked to entrepreneurs who are sure that they had a good idea and a good business plan, but they were never able to launch. Some failed because they did not pay sufficient attention to the negotiation challenges that entrepreneurs face. Some weren't even aware that they faced these challenges, so they were unprepared. I'm going to talk very briefly about the common negotiation mistakes that innovators and entrepreneurs tend to make that you can see on the screen. I want to say at the outset that both investors and VCs make many of the same mistakes. They focus exclusively on the financial valuation that someone else is willing to attach to their fledgling ideas. They focus only on their own interests and not those of their negotiating counterparts. They underinvest in the course of interaction with others in what I call value creation. They treat negotiation as a one-off interaction when in fact, long-term relationships are often crucial to any kind of entrepreneurial negotiation. They allow their emotions and their ego to rule, and they have no explicit negotiation strategy for dealing with uncertainty. I'll be talking about each of these mistakes and ways of sidestepping or remedying them in my MIT Professional Education course, as you heard, Entrepreneurial Negotiation the MIT Way, that begins on April 26th. Today, I'll say a little bit about ways of avoiding each of these mistakes. Before I start, though, let's take a quick poll and see what your thinking looks like. So I'm going to read this question, and you're going to see it, and you're going to see the choices, and I want you to pick one. In negotiating with an interested venture capitalist, what should an entrepreneur emphasize most? The financial valuation the VC is willing to assign the company, the legal structure of the corporation or entity they will be creating, control over the selection of top managers of the company, over design and production, or not allowing their emotions to get the better of them.
Thank you, Professor Susskind. We are going to leave the poll open for about 10 more seconds while everyone chooses their response. Great, we'll leave it open for about 5 more seconds. Go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Lee, what are your comments?
My comments are, I'm talking to a bunch of experts. That's cool. Let's look at your results. I think that 1 through 4 are important, but as most of you indicated, 5 is the big deal issue, certainly at the beginning of negotiations. I would also say that getting good results on 1 through 4 often depends on whether the investor or inventor and the founder think they're going to be able to work together. And that hinges on whether they trust each other. Laying the groundwork for a good working relationship, in my view, is crucial. And it should inform and can inform how the other 4 items are handled. In the entrepreneurial negotiation course, we'll be looking at ways of building trust and ensuring a good working relationship, even as you try to pursue your own interests as avidly as you can. For those of you on the West Coast in the US, know who Professor Heidi Roizen is at Stanford. She says so clearly, and she's written about it so elegantly, don't do bad business deals to get venture capital. You've got to be prepared to work with people. You've got to be focused on a whole array of things other than how much money is involved whenever you are in entrepreneurial negotiations. One of the key things in entrepreneurial negotiation is that you have to focus on the interests of the other side. And it doesn't matter who I'm talking to. Whichever side I'm talking to, if you want a good outcome, you've got to be focusing on the interests of the other side and not be totally preoccupied with your own interests. In the course, one of the cases we look at is a real estate joint venture. I don't want to give away all the details, but I'll say that many negotiators often fail to recognize that both sides don't feel the same time pressures and they don't attach the same value to money put up front versus over time. They have different discount rates. If you can't see the potential deal through the eyes of your negotiating counterpart, you will never get as good an outcome as you could get. So the question then is, what are the questions you need to ask the other side to really understand their interests? What you want to find out is which of the many items on a deal sheet are most important to the other side and why. You need to be ready with the right questions to probe the other side's interests, and you need to be prepared to talk about your own interests in a very clear way if you want them to reciprocate. You'll see in a few moments how you can use this knowledge, that is, knowledge of the other side's interests, to your own advantage. Let's try a second poll very quickly. Creating value in entrepreneurial negotiations, I've said, is important. Which of the following value-creating moves is most likely to be effective? Rely on outside advice about ways to improve a proposed deal. Start small and build on your success in negotiation. Stay focused on what you know best. Invest a lot of time in learning the other side's interests. Get the best legal advice you can afford.
Best legal advice you can afford.
Thank you, Professor Susskind. The poll is up and the results are coming in. We'll leave it open for about 20 more seconds while our audience submits their response. And we'll leave the poll open for about 5 more seconds, so be sure to select your response. Great, thank you. We're going to go ahead and close that poll and share our results. Professor Susskind, the results are up on the screen. What are your comments?
Obviously, you're listening or you knew all this before. Why is learning the other side's interests so important? Because it is the essential ingredient in making mutually advantageous trades. Value creation allows you to have more to divvy up, and the key to value creation is building on your awareness of the other side's interests. It's a lot easier to meet interests on all sides and reach a deal if you make the proverbial pie as large as you can before dividing it up and handing out pieces to one side or the other. Think about this. If I have something you want very much, but it's not that important to me, and you have something that I really need, but you could actually do without it, if we trade those two things, that's the creation of value. It's not compromise. We're creating value. Now, proposed trades should take the form of what-if offers. If I give you this and this and this, which I sense from your answers to my questions are the things that are most important to you, would you give me that, that, and that, which are, I'm telling you, key concerns of mine. And two sides in an entrepreneurial negotiation can keep putting out these what-ifs for as long as it takes to reach the moment where more value has been created, so there's a better chance of meeting the interests on all sides. My Harvard colleague, now no longer with us, Roger Fisher, many of you may have read his book, Getting to Yes, used the phrase, inventing without committing. I have watched so many entrepreneurial negotiations or debrief people after they've been involved, and they were all loaded for bear. They came in, they put their deal on the table. The opposite side said, no way. They bartered down. They never engaged in side-by-side inventing without committing. There's almost always a way to create more value through trades, but only if you know how and when to construct various packages. My concern is that win-lose thinking is self-fulfilling. All kinds of case studies where we get to talk to the two sides privately before they go into the negotiations they're going to have, and then we talk with them afterwards. They're not asking for our advice, so as researchers, we just listen. We can see that if you treat negotiation as nothing more than a struggle to get what you want at your counterpart's expense, you are surely going to end up with less than you could have had. Your interests are better served by thinking of ways of meeting the other side's interests pretty well while meeting your interests very well. A great many entrepreneurs and investors with whom I've spoken are surprised to find out that they can actually get a better deal for themselves by trying to help their counterpart do better, not worse. In the course, we'll be looking at a lot of negotiation videos. And in these videos, you'll be seeing me reviewing what happened with the negotiators involved. And we talk to them before they start off camera, then they do the negotiation, and we ask them to evaluate the results after. A great many of them are horrified when they have to view the inconsistencies between their stated commitment to finding a mutually advantageous or so-called win-win outcome when I compare that to their actual zero-sum negotiating style. You can see them behaving in ways where they think the only way they can do well is if they do in the other side. They stop thinking about the need for long-term relationships. They fall into the trap of short-term, issue-by-issue negotiation and who's going to be victorious on each item. Here's a final poll. There's 6 choices this time. Which of the mistakes that you saw the list of that I've been talking about worries you the most in terms of your reading or in terms of your relationships? Being too focused on short-term financial value, failing to fully understand the interests on the other side, underinvesting in value creation, having no strategy for dealing with uncertainty, or falling prey to cognitive biases, meaning getting locked in and you're thinking negatively about the other side and allowing emotion to rule. Again, sorry, five options. And again, I'm asking just for your personal opinion. Don't try to guess what I think is more important. Which worries you the most as you think about yourself as an entrepreneurial negotiator?
Great, thank you so much, Professor Susskind. The poll is open and our audience is submitting their results, and we'll leave it open for about 10 more seconds. Okay, very good. 5 more seconds, so be sure to submit your response. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results, and our results are up on the screen. What are your comments?
That's interesting. The results are pretty much distributed across these different factors. I think that's right. I mean, different people imagine themselves in different entrepreneurial contexts and worry about different aspects of the negotiation problem. I think the point is then that you need strategies for dealing with all of these. I'm going to focus for a minute on the last option, not that it's the most important in any kind of research-defined way, but falling prey to, again, I'll say a bit more about cognitive biases and allowing emotion to rule. And about a quarter of you are saying you worry a lot about that. If you're not in control of your emotions, or if you allow dangerous cognitive biases, and one of the most famous is called reactive devaluation. Professor Lee Ross at Stanford has written extensively about this, as have other social psychologists. If I assume that anything the other side says is suspect, because I'm sure they're trying to put one over on me. I'm sure they're saying everything in a way designed to make their result better and mine worse, then when they say nice things about my idea, if I'm the inventor, that must just be a trick on their part to do me in. If they say negative things, that's them just trying to get a foothold relative to the deal we're making. They don't really think negatively. It's just a trick. If you allow that kind of thinking to control you, you are unlikely to hear what's really being said. You're unlikely to be able to maximize value creation because you don't believe is authentic what the other side's saying, so you can't create trades for mutual advantage. So you are unlikely to find packages, results that bundle different issues that are good for them and great for you. You may even end up with no deal at all when a great deal was actually possible. We create various laboratory-like negotiating circumstances in which we give parties information where a deal's possible, and we watch many hundred pairs of people do these negotiations, and a substantial percentage in this circumstance get no deal. They're so suspicious of what the other side's saying, they're so withholding of the truth about their own interests that they can't find any kind of zone of possible agreement, and they fail to get agreement. They'll never know that agreement's possible, and anybody who is trapped in this kind of escalating emotional response to what's going on, this my idea, they're not treating me well, they're not respecting me, can in fact be scared off or so offended that no agreement becomes possible. In the entrepreneurial negotiation course, we'll be looking at ways of trying to anticipate and avoid this kind of reaction and some of the other mistakes I've mentioned. In the context of strong emotional or ego-based responses, where the parties' negotiation is cycling down to no agreement, one way of coping with this is to use agents on both sides to negotiate on behalf of the parties. And in the course, people will be asked to practice negotiating as agents, and we'll be comparing what happens when you use agents or even intermediaries. Imagine somebody trusted by both sides meets privately with the two sides, probes what each one thinks is possible, and then comes back and says to them, well, I'm not saying anything about the details of what both sides says, but I think there's plenty of room here to get agreement. Now start. Or they might say, no point wasting your time. I've met privately with both sides. You're going to not have much of a chance of getting agreement. Go on to something else. So the use of intermediaries, people trusted by both sides, can help to explore separately and confidentially what's really important to both sides, whether there's a zone of possible agreement or what I call the trading zone, and what can be done to get both sides to put aside or to get past their emotional responses. The investor may be saying, I need to look strong. If I look too sympathetic, they're going to think I'm going to give them the moon. And the inventor saying, I have a lot of pride in this, I put years into it, it's my idea, I'm not being respected. If those emotional responses get in the way of dealing with the merits of what should the valuation be, what should the partnership be, what is the business plan, what is the strategy for equity sharing, what are the ways of handling all the items on the deal sheet, then people won't get agreements. In the course, each person will be put in the position of either founder or VC in 4 separate negotiations. We hope you'll register jointly for the course with someone you know and someone who wants to practice negotiation with you. We'll give each of you confidential information clarifying your priorities in each negotiation, background material, confidential instructions. These will put constraints on what you can do in that role with regard to exploring possible deals. And, not surprisingly, in various of the role-play simulations or the practice negotiations, the parties won't look at the problem in the same way. They certainly won't calculate long-term risk and long-term benefit in the same way, and they're going to have to figure out how to deal with this. They're also going to have to cope with people interpreting the technical side of things differently. One of the things we'll talk about in the course, and one of the ideas I want to share with you now for dealing with technical complexity and dealing with various kinds of conflict in forecasts over the future, we could call that uncertainty, is to formulate contingent agreements. And the lawyers in the crowd are going to roll their eyes and say, but that's going to make the agreement more complicated. That's going to make it harder to know what liabilities and assets are on all sides at the point in which the deal is signed. Well, that's true. Imagine we made a deal that said, if your view of the market growth and the market share this joint venture could create is such and such, and I don't agree with that, and I have a different forecast, let's make an agreement that says, if you're right, these are the terms of the deal, but if I'm right, these are the terms of the deal. So now, in effect, our one contract has two deals within it. It's called a contingent agreement. And both sides can say, well, I'm confident in my forecast, so I value the deal in this way. So the two parties are really valuing the deal differently depending on how they assess the future. We'll look in more detail at the advantages and disadvantages of contingent agreements and how they can help entrepreneurial negotiators out. I'm eager to hear what questions you might have. I'll try to take questions and give short answers so I can take as many questions as possible. Let's see what your questions are. Someone will key them up for me and I will try to respond.
Let's see.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Susskind. As mentioned, we're now going to begin answering the questions that were submitted during the presentation. Just as a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Professor Susskind, our first question is, if negotiation is so important, why haven't more entrepreneurs paid more attention to it?
Great question. My sense is that most of the people who put time into creating some kind of a venture or elaborating an idea are focused on the technical, economic, legal aspects of that thing that they care about and know about. And my sense is that that focus has preempted the investment of time and energy in really learning about negotiation. And you can see plenty of stories, both in the popular press and in the media, and that is on television even, if you watch Silicon Valley, stories about a company in which somebody thinks they're getting a huge amount of money because they've made a commitment to an investor, and they end up with nothing. They thought the only thing they were negotiating was price or value, and they didn't pay attention to the other things. They were swept up with, in a narrow focus, with what their upside gain could be. So they're not instructed to do this. They have invested the time in learning how to do this, and they're surprised when it happens. My hope is that not just my own work, but work of many other people, are going to change that in the near term so that more people really focus on negotiation.
Thank you. Our next question asks, I heard what you said, but I still don't quite get what you're telling me to do to get better negotiation results as an entrepreneur.
Well, 6-week course will make it much clearer, but let me try to be succinct now.
My sense is that you need to prepare for every negotiation and take account of the interests of the other side and think about the negotiation through their eyes as part of your preparation. You need to be really clear about what you value during your preparation. You need to work with your whole team during preparation so they're not surprised by what you commit when you're actually in the negotiation. That preparing for negotiation is a big deal. That thinking about how you're going to behave, what your strategy is, all very important. Then when you're at the table, you need to be in control of your emotions. You need to have tools like contingent agreements. You need to have strategies like when to use agents. You need to know how to organize an agenda. And then you need to be able to follow that through with the other side. Whatever their view of things is, you have to, in a sense, negotiate with them about how you're going to negotiate if you want to get a good result. And when you think you have a result, I would argue you should be happy with that for the moment, sit with the other side and say, we now know our worst case. Can we together, sitting side by side, embellish this agreement? We can relax because we have this preliminary agreement. It's good enough for both of us to say yes. Now, how can we create more value and improve it and focus on building our relationship?
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how do you define emotion? Does showing emotion also mean displaying passion?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I would definitely say that any inventor, any founder who had no passion for what they're doing would be hurting themselves in terms of convincing somebody else to invest in their idea. So nothing that I'm saying suggests that people shouldn't show a passionate commitment to their own idea. Now, having said that, you can say with passion what your idea is, what your business plan is, what you think the value is of the thing you're creating, what you think the right business model is, organizational model. But if you become so prideful about that anyone who wants to suggest they think about it differently, you can't hear that, that's a disaster. The problem is how to be passionate about what you believe in, but how to be open to reason, how to be open to thinking about the problem from the other side's standpoint, how not to let ego, your attachment to things the way you think about them, get in the way of something that might be even better for you. So when I talk about emotion, I'm talking about that psychological dynamic. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm talking about that dynamic where people don't hear, don't listen, aren't open to any other framing of things besides what they have already committed to. And my argument is that gets in the way of doing better for yourself.
Thank you. Our next question is how to determine the interest of the other side.
Yeah, I mentioned it, I know, very quickly in passing. It's not so simple, and we will be spending time on it in the course, but if someone says to you, so there's 5 or 6 items here in this deal sheet. One is what's the valuation of the company. The other is who controls the selection of people on the board. Another one is what's the form of the stock we'll take. Another is how will dividends in the short term be either allocated or reinvested. You know, a whole set of items here. I would argue interests are the kinds of things important to you in rank order. So if someone says, here's a long list of things, what are your interests? What they're asking is, which of these are more important to you? And I would argue many people believe that it's a mistake to reveal your interests. I would say, no, that's wrong. If you ask me which of the items on this 10-item deal sheet are most important, I'm going to tell you because I'm not going away without a deal where I get what's most important to me. My interests are the kinds of things important to me in rank order. Now, distinguish that from I want 47% equity since you won't give me 50%. That's what I want. That's a position. The interest behind it is I want a fair amount of equity so I know that I have some say about what happens. I want a fair amount of equity so I know that my interests will be my concerns will be protected over time. The underlying reason you want your position is your interest. Okay? So asking people, what do you want, won't get you at their interest. Asking, what's more important to you, this, or this, that should help you understand the other side's interests.
Thank you. Our next question is, the problem about meeting interests of the other side is how to determine the actual intent, interest, line, upper and lower bounds of negotiation. So how do we, from outside, probe what the other side wants?
Right. So let me make a distinction, which again we'll go into in much more detail in the course, between your interests and your walkaway. The phrase in negotiation speak is best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA, BATNA. So if I say to you, tell me what the least is that you'll take, you should not tell me that, because that's all you'll ever get. And I'm sure you aspire to more than the absolute least you can live with. So interests, I ask, tell me which of these 5 things kinds of things is more important to you. Usually you can't ask someone what's the most you'll pay or what's the least you'll take and expect to get an accurate answer, and I wouldn't give an answer like that until I knew a lot more in the course of the conversation about what value we could create relative to our deal. And then I would recalculate once I saw, whoa, this is a much more valuable deal than I had imagined. I want to be treated fairly. I want to get my fair share of the value. That's my interest. But what exactly is that amount? That you have to probe in a very different way. You can't ask directly. So you said in the question, bottom line, actual intent, lower bounds. The edges of the negotiation are defined by the walkaways of the two sides. And those should not just be what they wrote out to themselves in a moment of personal reflection. Those should be based on a realistic sense of what their next best option is if they get no agreement. So I'm talking to you about, will you invest $100 million in my company? And you say, no, not unless I get 90% of the equity and I'm valuing the company at $120 million. And I say, I have a better offer in my pocket. That's not a bluff. That's my walkaway in this negotiation, is the offer I have in my pocket. My best alternative to our negotiation is that offer that I got. I'm waiting to get back to the other side. I would like to do better than that. Most of the time, I'm not going to say to you, well, I have an offer from somebody else. Can you match it? Because I would like to exceed it. So one possibility is you use realistic next best options, walkaways, as the basis for setting the bounds, but nobody's going to tell you that. So what you have to do is continue to put forward multiple packages for purposes of discussion, but not seeking a commitment and not offering a commitment. So I say, well, we have this possible deal. If I say, I'll give you $100 million, but I have to have a majority of the board, and you have to be vested over a 10-year period because I can't afford to have you leave. And we're going to use very conservative forecasts about market projections, and if you don't meet them, then you have to go in terms of your role as CEO. What do you think of that package? And the other person would say, well, what about no, I want this or something different. And so by putting forward packages, multiple packages, you are in fact indirectly probing what the other side's, we hope, we imagine, realistic walkaway is. Now, sometimes people just make demands, and they think that if they just look tough, don't yield, ask for an outrageous amount, the other side will give in. It doesn't work with experienced negotiators. People do their homework. They use evidence that they've gathered and say, that's not a reasonable calculation of the value of your company. Look, here's 5 other ventures I've been looking at. They're in the same sector as we are. There's nothing like what you're talking about as valuation. So you use multiple packages without committing to them as a way to probe the upper and lower bounds. You ask directly about interests.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is, if negotiation is stuck, how do I identify who can be the unbiased agent acceptable to both negotiation parties?
Right. It would actually be a good idea to talk before you start about, look, we're going to sit down, we're going to hopefully make a deal, but if we see promise in such a deal, but we can't work out the details and we get stuck, could we say before we start who we might turn to, who we both trust, who is someone we both work with, who can work professionally for the two of us, between the two of us, to assist us. It's not your lawyer, it's not my lawyer. It might be a professional mediator, doesn't have to be. Could be somebody who knows the sector well. The problem is, if you're stuck and you say, okay, we're stuck, let's get someone to help, I'm going to think that the person you propose is much more inclined toward your interests. I'm probably going to reject all the people you propose, and you're going to reject all the people I propose. It's very hard to solve this problem in the middle of being stuck. But if you talk ahead of time, while things are still optimistic, you say, we might use a helper from this professional association, we might use a consultant that we know from a firm that we both worked with. It could be a lot of different kinds of people. My concern is, don't wait till you're stuck to say what help or helper you want.
Great, thank you. Our next question is the trading zone the same thing as the ZOPA as discussed in Professor Suskind's negotiation courses at MIT?
Pretty much. The reason I call the trading zone the area between the least that one will take based on their BATNA and the most that one will offer based on their BATNA. The reason I call it the trading zone is if there's a space there, then it's possible to make trades and create value. If there's no space there, then there's nothing to trade and there's not going to be an agreement, at least if the parties have estimated their BATNAs or their walkaways properly. When we say zone of possible agreement, it doesn't have for me the sense of, well, you can still negotiate within that, not just to split the difference, not just with a win-lose orientation, but with the creation of value as your goal. So from a definitional or conceptual standpoint, they're roughly the same. I have a chapter in my book devoted to talking about this distinction. I don't want people to think that there's an analytically correct answer to every negotiation between a founder and an investor. I think that by virtue of their building a relationship, working together, sharing information, they can create more value than they thought, and those hard edges of the ZOPA blur as they create more value. So I don't think BATNA, ZOPA are as hard-edged as many people have said. I want people to see negotiation very much as an occasion to do better than they thought they could going in through the kind of collaborative process I'm describing.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what type of negotiation generally needs agent? Is it true it is uncommon to use agent when negotiating with VC?
Thanks for the question. It's really important. I would argue that a lot of negotiations can best be handled when the parties have trusted agents who are knowledgeable about their sides' passions, their sides' work in the past, their sides' view of things, because it keeps the emotional dimension out of it. I wouldn't want those agents to complete the negotiation. I think the agents are a good place to start. They can lay out options. Then they can bring what I would call their back tables, the people that would usually have started the negotiation. They can bring them in with a very bounded set of questions left to work out. I want the parties to be at the table before there's a final agreement, because that begins the process of building the relationship. But I think relying on agents in the early stages a lot more often would be a good idea. It is uncommon now because people think nobody else can explain this as well as I can, and nobody can defend my investment interests as well as I can. I don't believe that. I think people are trying to justify all their hard work and their existence, but I'd rather bring them in after trained, capable, knowledgeable agents have explored what is the zone of possible agreement, what are our common views, where do we disagree, what kind of contingencies might be possible, lay all that out, then bring in face-to-face the back tables to really close the deal and cement the relationship.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is, what is the best way to negotiate at concept stage?
Right. Even the word negotiation may be a bit troublesome at the earliest possible stages. What you really want is joint exploration, joint design, joint conceptualizing of what might be possible. We can separate out the part of an entrepreneurial process where inventing and problem solving is separate from dividing up, first creating and then dividing up the value. Just looking at the idea, thinking about what a business plan should be rather than negotiating whose view of the business plan is correct. I would say the best way to negotiate at a concept stage is to not negotiate, but to explore together, to design together, to problem solve together before you say, oh, okay, that's the best we can come up with, or that's an interesting version of it. Now who's going to get what? So I'm nervous, and at that point, in contrast to my earlier point, I would not send agents. I would want the actual people to be brainstorming. Treat the concept stage as more like brainstorming than traditional negotiation.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is, often one has different power levels in certain negotiation. What is your advice concerning shifting the power or equilibrate it from the stronger one more to the weaker one?
Right. Power is always a factor in negotiation, but power is dynamic. It is not fixed. It is not static. So the inventor or the founder sits with a very well-heeled, very experienced investor, and you'd say before any talk started, powerful VC, relatively powerless inventor. Then they start to talk, and the inventor says to the VC, so what is your most important objective in the coming year? Or what's the area that you haven't been in before that you now want to move into? Or what's the geography in some way that you now want to be present in? Or where have you failed before and you want to try to do better because your reputation has been affected? When you hear answers to those things that coincide with the interest of the less powerful inventor, suddenly there's some shift, not an equalization, some shift in power. The power also of a good idea. So the powerful VC says, well, we're only going to do this, this, and this with you because we have these other things ongoing. And the inventor says, well, what if we also brought you our friend over here, here, and here? I know that wasn't on the table today, but we have a very strong network. And what if we reframed the deal by our bringing in new compatriots or new elements to make a network instead of dealing with us individually? Power shifts. Power in entrepreneurial negotiation is dynamic. The more you understand what's important to the other side, the more you can put forward an elegant agreement that is good for them and great for you, doesn't cost them so much to be good for you. If it was purely about power, you would never get that deal. If it's about being inventive, about taking advantage of the knowledge you have, about using your alliances, about meeting the interests at low cost to you on the other side, and so on, all of those shift power. Again, I don't want to say it equalizes power, but the weak have been able to negotiate with the strong based on what people thought about who was weak and who was strong in ways that produce surprising results because the observers doing that analysis didn't really understand all of the interests on both sides, all of the internal pressures on both sides, all of the opportunities that were possible through reframing.
Great, thank you so much. And we have time for one last question. And the question is, what are the most common mistakes female entrepreneurs make in negotiations? Are there differences among genders in how they negotiate?
Great, thank you for raising that. There's such interesting research going on. My colleagues Deborah Kolb at Simmons College in Boston and Hannah Riley Bowles at Harvard. There are quite a few people really looking at this question about how men negotiate with men, how men would negotiate with women, women with women. Is gender more important than age? Is gender more important than rank? With regard to the question of female entrepreneurs, I don't think they're your average set of females. And so they're already better at certain things that help in negotiation. If you know how to negotiate as an entrepreneur, they are much more likely to be analytic about what do they want, what do they need. They can turn that to think about what the other side wants and needs. The generalization, and it's always dangerous to make generalizations about gender or race or anything else, but the generalizations that have been made by looking at the average female negotiator versus the average male negotiator, and you who are listening may need nothing close to average, is that female negotiators are more inclined to be cooperative than their male counterparts, that they're more inclined to try to find a way to resolve differences in a way that meets interests on the other side. The good news about that is it is 100% consistent with the approach to negotiation I'm describing. And if that happens to be right, as a tendency of female entrepreneurs, that they're more interested, more willing to try to overcome a disagreement, to be more cooperative, to meet interests on both sides, to voice their concerns in a way that is sensitive to the concerns on the other side, they're likely to do better as negotiators. But it's a longer subject. I'm obviously not giving it all the time that it requires, but that's, I think, all the time we have for questions right now. Well, entrepreneurial negotiations have special features. Ego and emotion can easily get in the way of a good deal. Inventors get defensive. Investors are overly assertive. Neither listens as carefully as they should. They think they know what the other side wants and needs. You need a strategy that allows you to deal with technical complexity and uncertainty. You need a self-conscious strategy, a set of ideas you can put into play. You need to put a premium on building good working relationships. A lot of smart people do not know how to pursue their own interests without undermining relationships at the same time. They come unprepared to formulate winning packages that meet the other side's interests as well as their own. We will be examining a variety of tools and techniques for handling these problems in the online course. You will be receiving an email shortly. If the entrepreneurial negotiation course is what you need, I hope you will join us when the course begins. Thanks for joining us today, and we are going to leave you with a short video that tells you a little bit more about the course. Thanks again. Let's think about a successful entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs take ideas, try to convince other people to support them. That's a negotiation. They try to put people together to staff their efforts. That involves negotiations. They try to put money together. That involves negotiations. Effective negotiation is absolutely crucial to successful entrepreneurial efforts.
I said I was looking at closer to 2 or 3.
I'm just trying to understand where we are.
Entrepreneurial negotiators have to deal with problems unique to entrepreneurial negotiation. The first has to do with emotional reaction
behind my back
of people who have a lot at stake.
Are we even in the zone here?
No.
The second unique feature is technical complexity.
I'm going to go line by line in front of a jury and say, this is my code. He has no idea what it is.
I'm not here to argue. What I'm here to do is I'm trying to find a way forward.
There's a lot of uncertainty.
There's nothing like this out there.
I think it all comes down to the risk.
The final unique feature has to do with building long-term relationships.
We're interested in you because of your expertise, your reputation for being dedicated to the companies that you work with.
We can teach people how to negotiate and build trust. MIT can claim a unique entrepreneurial ecosystem. We teach negotiation using role-play simulations. As soon as someone imagines themselves in that situation, it's personal. You can talk to the person who you negotiated with. How did I come across? I thought you were really angry. I better work on how I come across. That critical lens is what will lead you to make adjustments, try things a different way, and continue to learn from your own experience.